Friday. We're going to wrap up our week getting into the next portion of Psalm number 2. So before we begin, let me remind you to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be made aware every time we put out a new video. Let's get right into it. Verses 4 through 6. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king in Zion, my holy mountain. Now, we're following this up where the psalmist yesterday with us was talking about he was just confounded why people challenge God or why they don't see God the way that he sees God. And now he's kind of saying, here's kind of the resolve to that. And he uses this phrase, the one enthroned in heaven laughs. Now, we don't generally attribute human characteristics to God, but we should, like sense of humor. God created us in his image. God has a sense of humor. God does have these things. God, probably, I imagine God being frustrated a lot. I really do, because, he has all of these things, all of this knowledge, being able to see everything and hold time in his hands. And yet he watches us down here, literally just stumbling all over ourselves, making fools of ourselves, worrying about stuff that is relatively inconsequential. But the one enthroned in heaven laughs. And I think it talks about how God looks at the ways of man. And he just finds them foolish. It doesn't make sense to him, probably, that we would plot against him. I mean, just think about that. He's like, could you imagine God's perception of the Tower of Babel? Look how easily he defeated the Tower of Babel. He literally just confuses everybody. Everyone speaks differently now, so there's no communication. As if to say, look, guys, try all you want. You're being ridiculous about this. So God laughs because it says he sits in the heavens. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. Seated on the throne, we might want to think of God in the standpoint of in this big heavenly chair with this flowing robe and this beard and everything. But really, God sees all things. He's not just stuck in heaven. God is omniscient, omnipresent, all of these things. So when he sees these things taking place, he's not trembling in fear. He's not worried about any of this. He's actually finding it somewhat comical. And then it says the Lord scoffs at them. Now, through the centuries, many people have opposed God, have opposed his kingdom and opposed Christ, and still do. Each one of these opponents, everyone who's ever come against God, winds up being frustrated and crushed. And there are countless examples of this. I'm not going to get into too many of them. This idea that the Lord scoffs at them is one that just, again, comes from the notion that we think we understand God's ways when we really don't. And then lastly, it says he rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath. Has God ever terrified you? Have you ever been really afraid of God? Not the healthy fear, but the unhealthy fear kind of thing where you're like, boy, I've been doing something wrong. And if God finds out about it, I'm in trouble. And God's known about it all along. See, remember that God's laughter in heaven is not at the expense of his people. It's just this element that says, wow, will you guys just get it? And actually, the fact that he rebukes them in his anger, that he terrifies them in his wrath, shows tremendous mercy on the part of God. He doesn't have to rebuke us, and he doesn't have to terrify us. He could wipe us out. Going back to the Tower of Babel, he could confuse us instantly. I've often heard people say that God is not the author of confusion. I don't believe that's true. How do you come to grips with what happened at the Tower of Babel? Author of confusion. He absolutely did author confusion even in that moment for those people. But when God rebukes us, when God imparts in us an element of terror, it's actually an act of mercy on his part, because what we probably deserve is much worse. And that's your devotion. You serve a loving God, a God who cares about you, a God who thinks you matter, a God who thinks you matter so much that he sent his son to die for you. Just remember that as you go about your day. That's it, guys. As always, go bless somebody else today. Do something amazing for somebody else and watch what happens in your life. See you.